It requires a high degree of awareness to know when you're being pulled into something that is trapping you, right? And the capacity to make a conscious choice to not be trapped.
How do we find that in these situations where maybe we are dealing with a lot of things that seem outside of our control? Reconnecting to that sovereignty would be a very useful practice right now, at least for me.
Welcome back. This is Exploring Resonance, episode 3. Last time we talked about home, and we had a pretty profound dialogue on the feeling of home and the experience of home to us. And this dialogue is going to be very related. We're going to talk about the subject of autonomy and sovereignty. And whenever we're in our home, we want to feel sovereign over ourselves and our what happens in our home. So very related to that feeling of being at home. But first, we'll do our life check-ins and see how everybody's been doing the last couple of weeks. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I will. So I'm still in Tahiti. I've got a little over a week left. And it's been a really wonderful experience, not having any distractions other than the beauty of the place. But actually, it's been a great time for introspection and some deeper inner work, and seeing in the inner layers even more attention to thought patterns and experiences and beliefs that need shifting, or just really need a shift of attention, really. So I've become very aware of my harsh inner critic, and also been aware of, at some point, a loss of will to succeed, which surprised me. And I became aware of this inner conflict of wanting to succeed, and then part of me not wanting to succeed. And so allowing that conflict to be there in my conscious mind, rooting it up out of the subconscious, and exploring that's been very, very interesting. And I feel deeply at peace, probably more deeply at peace than I've been in a long time. So it's been an interesting time of introspection. Yeah. Pretty short check-in.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm happy to go now. Awesome. I wasn't sure how long you had left in Tahiti. That's exciting. Get another little week to kind of enjoy it. So 2 weeks ago, I remember we talked about home. And at the time, I think I was on taking a trip. So I think it was just a few days after that, I apparently had a double bacterial infection. The walking pneumonia I knew about, and then the doctor called me and said I also had a totally separate intestinal infection. So I got another whole blast of antibiotics. Pretty much rested for a while, and then went down to Wilmington, which is the coast, which is great for me. I've discovered recently the importance of water, being near water in my life, and visited with an excellent old friend. So it was sort of this initial healing arc of just kind of falling apart after the last year of insanity, basically. And then very close friend who's very grounded and earthy and nurturing, just staying at his place. So that was excellent. And then I went to Charleston for some fun times with some other friends and ate a lot of amazing food. So yeah, it was sort of a continuation of this healing arc of, resting and then nurturing and then fun, needing all of them. So came back up to the mountains of NC, I guess this past Monday, and it's just sort of been reorienting. And I feel like we're sort of at least here we are. I don't know about Texas, nor Jordan, nor Tahiti, but where I'm at, certainly the beginning of springtime feeling. So I feel similarly in my life. That was sort of the closing arc of a certain chapter and a sort of a reset trip. Really good to get away out of this bioregion, importantly, and then came back. So yeah, it's just sort of been resetting those things. And my goal was to really begin, I guess you would say, taking steps of which I've done, take walks and formulate things to do in areas I want to apply myself toward. And the goal was to begin in March. So it's about to be the weekend. I've given myself until March 3rd, which is Monday. So I'm very excited. Just, it's not, one of my topics for today was yin. This is a old rote thing that I like to talk about, but I'm just like, I cannot do things with that kind of yang intensity, go after it. And right now I'm tapped out. I'm like, if it's going to happen, it's got to have that yin healing, watery, like it needs to come. I'll catch the right timing. If I catch the right timing, I'm not spending energy on it. And I just can't push anything. And so I've really been taking that to heart. And so the words I've wrote down for myself was healing, goodness, critically. Come back to the goodness. That's really hard these days. And I think that's an important, especially with everything going on, to come back to that and remember that in springtime. So kind of where I'm at. I'm enjoying this last weekend and looking forward to March and springtime. So thanks, y'all.
I'll go next. I've got a complementary young energy going through me right now as well. So yo yin, all yang. 2 weeks ago, I think, the day of recording the podcast afterwards, went through a pretty symbolic interaction and started standing up for some of my boundaries that I hadn't been enforcing before. And it turned into kind of like this archetypal transformation where I feel now unblocked to begin to go after the things that I've been saying I want to go after. I'd been comparing myself to some of my friends who were a little bit further down the progress path in terms of making things happen in their life. And I just needed to back away from holding myself to that standard and just embrace who I was and what I want to create and how I want to create it and not compare it anymore. And so I feel very unblocked, and I feel like I'm now able to tap into pulling through what wants to come into expression through me. So I've done a lot more writing on slides for projects, and I've been making progress on an article that I'm writing for my Substack. So I'm feeling very like the gears are engaged, and the things that I'm doing are translated into effective, if not state change in the world, at least a sense of being able to express my own voice and the empowerment that has and comes with it. So, the topic today is sovereignty and autonomy, and those two things have been something I've felt like I've struggled with most of my life, but I really feel like I am beginning to start, my engine is revving and I'm beginning to fire with all cylinders, and I'm looking forward to what life will be like in a year, 3 years from now, who knows, very different. And so it'll be interesting also to see those changes captured in the recordings of these podcasts, to see me go through those changes as well when looking back. So looking forward to seeing how we all evolve over the next few years through these podcasts.
I guess it's my turn. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing. So inspiring. For me, the last couple of weeks, the last time we met, I was also taking antibiotics as well. So now I've been antibiotic free for 10 days. I have to run certain tests and cultures to see if actually that worked. I do feel better energetically, but I'm not sure if it's because the infection has completely gone or because I'm not taking the antibiotic. So I hope it's both. So with this,
in coming out of a place of, I was taking antibiotic for a whole month before that. That's the longest I've ever had in my whole life. And it seemed like I was dealing with something that's deep for me, that's symbolizing that. And emerging out of that, I found myself over the last 2 weeks engaging a beautiful energy of, clarity, courage, and maybe compassion, all put together, combined. And they are energies that were needed, or they were present in order for me to continue to let go of more attachments that were that I wasn't even completely aware of in my relationships, in my family relationships. And it was a great experience to go through that letting go. And at the same time, experiencing letting go comes with certain degree of sadness. Sometimes maybe what is needed to spend time with as we let go before the transformation kicks in. It's almost going on faith here that this transformation is going to happen, and just trusting the good that will come out of it, no matter what. But it's also being able to sit with that sadness that comes with any change, really. So it was beautiful to be able to sit with that sadness as well, and not stop myself from just feeling the sadness, and still know that it's a natural process that comes with any kind of change, or even if it's an invitation for change. So that was a big experience, and I'm still going through it, but I'm going through it with more compassion, how can I say, for me and for others. And it's actually proving to be the healthier way of being in relationships, the more enjoyable way of being as well. And it's not a detachment or anything like this, but it's almost like restructuring the attachment and transforming it from being attachment to being the more interdependent relating. Yeah, I want to say that. So, and I love that. I also want to say that maybe this is linked to some work that I've been doing with my clients, and it might hit on the idea here of sovereignty and home again, because in home, if I felt like if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to be myself as well, fully and freely and safely and authentically. And that's what really home is about, isn't it? So I want to say, when we talk a little bit more about sovereignty, I can talk a little bit more about as well where this is coming from, this feeling, or where I feel in my experience and working with my clients. It's usually, I think it's an alignment. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's just a natural alignment of working with that inner, cultivating that connection to that inner sanctum, that inner space, the source, as the source for all this clarity and courage and compassion. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go through it deeper. But thank you for listening. I'm in a good place. I feel really grounded in the inner home as such. And thank you so much. We are also starting to have spring here, so the green is starting to appear everywhere in Jordan, and it's always a happy time, beautiful time of beginning as well. And thank you for listening.
So I'm curious, does anybody want to give their understanding of the words? Just kind of a little dictionary-ish understanding of the words, but to ground like the meaning. Go ahead, Elizabeth, please.
Yeah, when I think of sovereignty, I think of the things that we are free from and the things that we are free to. So if I am sovereign, I'm not just free of external authority or oppression, but I'm also free from, I also am free from my own oppression of my own beliefs and meanings and attachments, right? And I love what Fatin said, the natural sadness that we have when we realize that we have attachments that are not in everybody's best interest, that they're to be allowed to be released into a different expression, and that there is sadness in that. So it's not that in sovereignty that we don't experience emergency emotions, but it requires a high degree of awareness to know when you're being pulled into something that is trapping you, right? And the capacity to make a conscious choice to not be trapped. And we could, reference so many different points of what all of that could be, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And autonomy, that's an interesting topic. To be autonomous and yet connected, and to be autonomous and one at the same time. So I'm an individuated expression of oneness, but even though I am autonomous, for me, it means I don't get to make decisions without consideration of how those decisions affect others. And to put, that everybody in the room is as important as I am, and I am as important as everybody in the room. And so, being a recovering codependent people pleaser type person, that's a big thing for me to say, I'm as important as everyone else in this room. And what works for me is this, and this doesn't work for me. And these are the requests that I have. Could we dialogue and negotiate this? Is a really big thing. But I think that's a true essence of autonomy, is just to even be able to say those types of things and do what you feel is right. Yeah.
I can share maybe some. I so resonate with what you just said, Elizabeth. I feel that the magic word for me here is freedom. And whenever I think of freedom, I also what opposes freedom is illusion for me. Okay? So an illusion means I can't really clearly see or sense or have an alignment with what feels to be clear or truth. It's just like whenever there's illusion, there's no real freedom. And that's for me. So for me, the sovereignty is very much, as you said, related to freedom. So freedom to and freedom from as well. That is true. So inviting that balance. And I think that immediately links it to autonomy, because autonomy is about interconnectedness. So, we can speak about this forever, but the interconnectedness, I cannot be interconnected really if I'm not differentiated, because then I'm either too connected and too attached, or I'm averse from something and I'm detached. So the interconnectedness by default for me requires that I am, autonomous, which means I'm differentiated. I know where I began and where I end, but I also maybe know where someone else begins and ends as well. And this spills into boundaries, healthy boundaries, and all kinds of things that come with that. So I don't know if autonomy is, it might be a process as well. It could be a state of being, but also a process as well, like an experience as well. So we can talk so much more about this. I'm so eager to explore it even more with you guys. So yeah, tentatively, I can stop here and then we can go further into this. Because to me, when I think about this, I'm not just thinking about it in terms of, as you said, it's not just the physical being, but also I think about it in terms of the exchange, the energetic exchange between me as an individual, like this psycho-spiritual being, and all the elements that are surrounding me. So either within the seen world or the unseen world as well. So all the energies that are unseen. And we can talk a little bit more about this if you guys are interested. I'm interested. Yeah.
This is excellent. This is excellent. I love all of y'all's definitions or ideas of that, the freedom and illusion contrast. I mean, being pulled into something that's trapping you. Thank you. Gosh, yeah, my angle, being loving history, and listening to reading the history of Europe right now, I just think of like the sovereign king, and it got me thinking, what does sovereign mean in that way? And I was starting to think about power, as you indicated, and self-rule, right? Self-governance, something like that. And I was juxtaposing that with, well, what do you serve? But we all serve something, so does that remove our sovereignty if we're serving something or not? And I was like, that can't be it. But now you got me thinking, to bring it current, is I think a lot of people's feelings of sovereignty are under threat right now. Something like that. And how do we restore that? How do we find that in these situations where maybe we are dealing with a lot of things that seem outside of our control, right? Be that, as when the hurricane came through, or my father, or the election, depending on your relationship to what's going on with that. Where's my sovereignty now, right? And so I'm just throwing that out there. It's a sense, and I do feel there's a way to find that, but it maybe comes back to those attachments that you were talking about, Faten. Something behind that, where that is found, and it feels like reconnecting to that sovereignty would be a very useful practice right now, at least for me. Be that politically or personally, or bad habits you may have that I may have. Are those controlling you, or am I sovereign in my life? What does that even mean? And I'll mute it. Y'all can answer the question.
Yeah, for me, we live in shared spaces. My experience overlaps with somebody else's experience. We both affect the same world. If I leave the toilet seat up, my wife might yell at me. So we all have like this sense of what we want to participate in, and it's different for everybody. We express different words. We are interested in participating in different kinds of groups. And so we live in this shared space where my will and your will are potentially in conflict. But we have overlap in the experience. So I think every individual wants to be sovereign over what happens to them directly, like their body, but also into the spaces that they occupy. I want to feel like it's safe to be myself fully in these spaces. And so the big philosophic question for me is, how do we find a way that we are all mutually feeling sovereign while we're having these overlapped experiences? And that's where the dialogue comes in, so that we can start talking about, what's equitable, how do I not make it me versus you, my will versus your will, but how do we find like compromises that we both get to experience what we want, or dialogue over the nature of what happens in a space so that we're both in alignment with what happens and we both feel sovereign in that space. So those are the types of questions I'm chewing on right now. If you're going to do any kind of community building and create a space where people begin to feel like they've got more sovereignty and autonomy in a shared community setting, a very intimate shared community setting, what kinds of dialogues are necessary and what kind of interactions facilitate a greater sense of sovereignty in those situations?
And as you said that, one quick sentence, as you said sovereignty, you got me thinking, do we get to choose where to assert our sovereignty? Like, I'll give that up in this domain, but here I really want to extend that, and then co-sovereignty and things like that. So just noodling on it. I saw one of y'all were getting ready to talk.
I think Elizabeth is next, and then we'll go to Fountain.
Okay. Wow. What a conversation here I've got. Yeah. So this idea of sovereignty as if it's the highest order. I see sovereignty as a process in order to get somewhere, both for ourselves as individual expressions of oneness and as societies. And in order for people to feel sovereign, to feel sovereign, to experience it, they have to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, there is an implication that they're going to get what they want. Not just get what they need, but get what they want. At least in our Western world. In other parts of the world, it's just what I need. And the definition of need and want is very different for everyone. So, to have a group of people, no matter how big or small, to preserve the sovereignty requires a high degree of consciousness, and which requires a high degree of willingness, a high degree of willingness to, as Thomas was saying, give up my sovereignty. But if you consciously make a choice, and I don't believe in compromise, I do not believe in compromise. Compromise, there's always somebody feeling left out and less than and dissatisfied in compromise. I believe in finding that middle ground where we're both satisfied. And Edward, you wrote in your article that you're writing for Substack, your rules of engagement, right? For the embodied transpersonal community, that at some point, and I've talked about this for a while, right? Your inner circle of people, and then there's the outer circle. Your inner circle are your intimate confidants and companions, partners, etc. And then on the outer circle are your acquaintances, which you addressed in your article as well. And then on the big outer circle are the people that there's not a resonance with, to the point that civility has either been lost or there is such dissonance that you can't be around each other in a healthy way. So you agree to, see each other as little as possible. And if you have to, you're just cordial, right? You agree to not fight. And so there's these degrees of experience of sovereignty that requires agreement from other people. And that requires dialogue. The reason we are in the mess that we're in, why we can't have dialogue, why we're so fractionized right now, goes all the way back to Reagan, President Reagan. So every news outlet in the United States at that time, on their political talk shows and their commentaries, at the end of the news, there was a commentary from the, editor. But they had to represent both sides of an argument. And, the Sunday morning news shows, I don't know if anybody my age, we used to watch those, but the Sunday morning news shows, there was a dialogue between the parties. And the news stations were required. So when Reagan changed those laws to the Federal Trade Commission, that because Ted Turner wanted a 24-hour news station, and Reagan changed that. I believe it was an executive order from Reagan, where he changed the law that said you no longer have to have both parties. You can have a news outlet with just one perspective. So we've been coming to this. That's what happens. And because we're human, if we don't have something governing sovereignty, which those laws were governing sovereignty for all parties, giving all parties the right to come to the table and requiring this kind of dialogue, contentious as it might be. When we took that requirement out of our society on a broad cultural level, this is how this happens. So I can be sovereign in my corner and you can be sovereign in your corner. But if there's nothing that requires us to come together and dialogue about it and find a solution that works for as many of the people as possible, here we are. So I'm curious, how we get back there. So I hope I didn't go way too far off, but some of the things that you said is, how do we make it equitable? Is there has to be some overarching governance in an embodied transpersonal community that has these types of requirements, that all perspectives are honored to be spoken and brought in for examination. I'm complete.
You're asking the question about there has to be something equitable here. Did you say that? If I remember, for us to come together and talk about, right? In order to initiate that dialogue. And I feel like, but there is. It's not like we have to come up with it. Where is our starting point? If we are at the level of awareness that we realize our interconnectedness, then that is the point of departing from perceiving or exercising or experiencing sovereignty here as power over. So this confusion of I'm sovereign, that means it doesn't mean that I have my own inner power that empowers my differentiation and enriches my qualities that I give and put on the table, and offer it while others offer something else, and then we can enrich our experience from these differences. But it becomes, when it's interpreted as, oh my God, if I'm sovereign, that means I want to get what I want in my environment because I'm sovereign, and that means I do it by exercising power on others so that I can get back. So I lose touch with the interconnectedness. So, for example, and that's a source of, I want to say evil, because that's how we destroy then our atmosphere and the ecosystem and all that kind of stuff, right? So if the sovereignty is related to my inner source of power, my own alignment, and that brings me to what you said, Thomas, when you said, well, we all have to serve something. I wonder if that's true. I wonder if we can substitute the word serve. We all have to serve something. And I know this has been, suggested, and maybe we can look at this sentence, and instead of saying we all have to serve something, maybe we can say we all want to be in alignment with something, or discover our alignment, or something which suggests some sort of a partnership. And again, putting us back into that place of interdependence. Because with the service, and I know the word service can be also taken in a positive sense as well, right? But to serve something in the sense immediately suggests some sort of a hierarchy. So I'm just wondering if we need to look back at the bigger umbrella, the bigger experience, and have that inform, the individual one. Does this make any sense? What I'm saying, I don't know if I expressed what I wanted to express. I'm trying, however. So, are we inventing, or do we need to really find what brings us in dialogue, or is it a state that is just covered by the misunderstanding, and we just need to clear those misunderstandings? I'm wondering about this. And in that case, wouldn't sovereignty become like a tool rather than an end goal by itself? So this is how I'm thinking about it. And it's like, this idea that also of the concentric circles. Yes, we have those relationships that are so intimate. But as we move into the bigger circles, when we reach the biggest circle, we're actually interconnected, rather than the more we move out of the inner circle, we move into circles of where the outer level is one of hostility and conflict. Could be a stage. I don't know. Maybe it's a stage where we learn from it. But I'm just, I'm thinking about that in terms of, I'm imagining it as like, maybe that's the way we've been trained to think, that the more we move away, the more dangerous there is, the less protection, the less safety it is. So eventually we're going to come to a circle where we are in conflict. Yeah. So I'm adding to the questions, I guess.
I love that point. I think that's phenomenal. Absolutely. It's so much perceptual and relational things are built into our languaging. You really got me like, absolutely, as opposed to service, what's a different way of relating, co-creating, And then so sovereignty, I was thinking of, man, humans are sovereign over the earth and the beasts, and, versus like, as we said last time, stewarding, right? And that just completely changes that dynamic. It's not anything over, there's this mutuality. So I don't know, that's where you got me thinking now with all of this. And I think that's absolutely spot on. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And I agree that sovereignty is more of a process than an end result, because if it stays in the end result, that's when we have people staying in factions. Okay. And the alignment. The way to happiness in any relationship is being aligned to the happiness of the other. If I'm aligned to your happiness, even if you're in a different political party or a different culture, but I'm aligned to your happiness as our Constitution calls us to, right? The pursuit of, right, our happiness. So if I'm truly a constitutionalist in the United States, I'm aligned to the well-being and the happiness of all. If I'm working towards my embodying the highest level of consciousness I can in this lifetime, I have to be aligned to happiness, and I have to be aligned to wanting to know what the difference between pleasure and pain is. And I have to be willing to have my meanings recontextualized in order to be aligned, in order to include everyone, in order to handle the conflict as I find myself in conflict? Am I willing to look beyond the conflict to see what's really underneath it? Anyway, just some thoughts.
Could you say a little bit more about the recontextualization?
Recontextualization of the meaning of happiness.
You mentioned pain and pleasure.
Oh,
as
yeah. The recontextualization of pain and pleasure. So I may think that pleasure is having everything the way I want it in my sovereign state. But then it might isolate me, or it might create friction in my family, right? And I may have to review what my happiness is. Is it really, am I free? Am I free in my pleasure? Or is my pleasure beginning to cause me pain? And then I'm going to look at that pain, and I'm going to feel into what is the truth here. How is everybody relating? Get curious, how are they relating to this? And is there some readjustment or realignment to what sovereignty means to me, and happiness and pleasure mean to me, and what does pain mean to me? That's what I mean by that.
I think that's in the article I was writing. I was talking about sovereignty from a transpersonal perspective. And that's the necessary recontextualization of what does sovereignty mean to me, where it's not just my sovereignty that I care about. It's also the sovereignty of the people around me. And I care about them getting to do what they want to do. And that I'm also going to participate in the process of me expressing my autonomy, them expressing their autonomy, and that, so that we are all sovereign at the same time, as opposed to sovereignty being a competition or a zero-sum game where if somebody else is sovereign, I can't be sovereign because, there's no room for both of us at the same time. Yeah, there's definitely a recontextualization that's necessary where you enter into a different kind of perspective of identifying with life in general and the life expressed through the people around you, as opposed to just your life.
But it's also the life expressed in every, expression of life. So it's the life expressed in the people, but it's also in all the elements around us as well. Like the plants and all of this, like, do plants have a right, to exist? Do they have feelings? Can they also enjoy the same, kind of rights that we as humans have to be safe, to be preserved, to be balanced, to be, all of these things? And whenever we talk about happiness, I can't stop thinking about this. Like, in countries that occupy other countries, and when there is an exercise of genocide, I sometimes spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what is the other one who's occupying thinking? How can they be with that kind of, exercising power over and all the occupying atrocities that, and really, like, if I look around at it historically, because that community have found in each other definition for what makes them happy and what is right and what is, and they do not need, I don't know, or they seem to not need to, feel the interconnectedness to all those that they are occupying or to the environment around them. And they're okay because they're happy they're not, that their circle, their inner circle is not affected, and they seem to be in alignment with that inner circle. So I think that brings me to the question is, how important it is to check what are we in alignment with when we are thinking about that happiness, and maybe to think about pain and pleasure as they're always transient states. Like pleasure is, the attachment to the pleasure actually might be problematic. It's some of the things that will affect our sovereignty. It was an interesting discussion that I had the other day. Actually, it was a work in a session, and I want to say that it was a beautiful work that I had the privilege of witnessing, where someone was talking about joy, and there was an interesting question that came up, which is the difference between unconditional joy, that's a state of being that flows from a certain place, and pleasure, and how the attachment to the pleasure that is transient, or even to the pain that is also transient, is not to be compared to that state of joy that is out of the outcome of just balanced being and alignment. So again, more questions are coming up for me around this. Like who are we aligned with, and becoming aware of, again, this brings me again to the moving here from the macro, the necessity of moving into the macro in order to see the interconnectedness, in order to decide, well, who am I aligned with? What am I aligned with? Because I could be aligned with a group of people who is finding a lot of content, who are very content with a certain experience, where they just find what they need within that group, and it doesn't matter how it affects the rest of the world. And of course, this is happening just right now in front of our eyes, right? Everywhere.
And that's a direct result. Well, one of the mainstreaming factors was allowing in society this, fractioning off these conversations from being whole conversations, and allowing this fraction of the society to have their conversation over here with no dialogue with the other, et cetera, et cetera. Because what happened was we stopped seeing the pain of other people and only focused on the pains or the joys of what we agree with and what we're in alignment with and who we're in agreement and alignment with. We stopped seeing the whole more than, we are now, not seeing the pain of the whole much more than we did prior to the 80s. And yeah, it's just, I just, follow the thread. When we lose touch with what's happening with others, just, look at the news in America. Have you seen anything about the recovery and all the displaced people still with no place to live and still having to go to food kitchens in California and North Carolina? With the disasters that we've had, like 80,000 people having to go to food kitchens. Unless you're watching their local news, you do not see or hear anything about it. I think it takes so much more effort to discover the other in today's society. And we have to want to. And I think, the want to, I don't want to know those other people's pain because I'm in pain and because this is happening. So I can't look at them and their pain. And I'm not saying I think it's just human nature.
So there's, and if I'm bringing up, what about the life of the plants and the animals and the environment and everything about it. It's empathy, right? It's our willingness to be open to the experience of what's happening around us, and that we have seemed to have lost the capacity for empathy for others, for the outgroup, for our environment. We're not really listening for the effects that are happening and the crying out of being in pain that is occurring. We've just numbed ourselves to listening to the in-group party line or the in-group point of view. And that's because that's what we're using to soothe our own pain and numb out the rest of the pain that we're hearing in other people.
And I feel that maybe that's a response to feeling helpless or hopeless. So this is kind of, well, if I believe that I won't be able to make a difference and my exposure to that pain is just going to overwhelm me and maybe stunt me, okay? And then feel guilty or something, all a host of things that come with that. So just believing that we won't make a difference, we're helpless or powerless or hopeless in terms of making a difference, even if it's a small difference, then of course we're going to avoid that pain, right? Why should I be exposed to that pain of things that are horrible, not just awful, but they are beyond horrible? Like when I see babies dying or starvation or something like this, and I feel like, oh my God, what can I do, right? It won't make a difference. How did we get here? So again, we talk about all of this, and then it's like, okay, but sovereignty is having the ability to actually choose, to make a choice, and over what I want, how I want to respond, right? What am I in alignment with when I'm responding? That's the way I think about it. So what am I in alignment with when I am responding? Am I in alignment with fear? Am I in alignment? What am I in alignment with?
Right. That's right before this call, when we were in the kind of waiting room, I was telling everyone that I felt very weak, having gone through a couple hours of pretty difficult emotional conversations with a few friends who were struggling. And what happened is Edward had us suggested we just do a centering meditation for a few minutes. And during that time, the only shift and the important shift that happened in me was just saying to myself, yeah, I'm weak right now. That was it. And instead of having to be like, oh, bring, some image of myself that how I'm supposed to be today, doing a podcast recording, so instead it was just, yeah, I'm going to be weak today during the pod, whatever that means at this point. But, and so that felt like alignment to me. Suddenly, boom, something got into alignment. And I feel like that principle, so much of what we're circling right now is, where does sovereignty come from? And to me, that's one of the main steps when you're present with the situation as it is. And I feel what we're going through in these challenging times, a lot of what I try to do, I think we all do, is like push it away, but the walls are getting smaller, I can't, I got to hold on to some shred of hope that I can go back to some other way of things are great, I want to feel that again. And I just can't, it's like, it's coming in. And so then I feel like there's just a few choices. One is maybe at some point it just things collapse and my heart breaks and I just fall into a puddle and cry a bunch, which could well happen. That could be great. So there's that, the grief that comes with letting go of how things were and how you wish it would be, But then there's like that push to find the sovereignty as it is now, to me, then circles back to that deeper source of joy, those attachments to the pain and the pleasure. And it's like, yeah, I just want to keep, maybe turn to the sources of pain or push away the sources of pain and pleasure. But it forces us to find those attachments and like find that. I mentioned finding the goodness. That was my recent practice. Like, remember that goodness, but to find that, I can't look at just the simple old places I would necessarily find it. It has to come from that deeper source. And so I feel like that's another one of the responses potentially as we're having that question, like, where is sovereignty now? Where is joy? What is my response now that isn't just as simple as avoidance or something like that? So I don't know. That was just all hitting me. I felt like this was all kind of circling something that we've all kind of touched on. And so, yeah, some part of me shaking as I say that. There's a deep, deep sadness, just like, oh my God, I could fall on the floor and bawl, But on the far side of that, like, I know there's that joy. I know there's that goodness. I know those attachments, they're not serving me anymore, There's another place to find.
As you're speaking, I was getting this image of water. I spoke of water earlier, and I'm like, wow. Like, if I look at the river, not one drop of water is trying to swallow the other drop of water. Like, all the drops of water are together cohesively making this body of water, this fabric of water that's fluid and that's moving in harmony, even in different stages, even in the stages where it's roaring or, cutting through the ground to, dig its path, through rocks. And then they don't compete when they're joining the ocean. And even in the ocean, making all these, this fabric of water. And I'm like, wow, that there is no issue around sovereignty. They have to be the drops. Otherwise, the river just won't be. And I feel that, as you're speaking about this, Thomas, I'm remembering the four immeasurables in the Buddhist traditions, equanimity and that unconditional joy, how they're an interconnectedness and how they move away from attachments and aversions as well as pain. Maybe the extreme expression of that would be pleasure and pain as well. And I'm just thinking, like, these are in the Buddhist tradition and many sacred traditions as well. They are almost like the building blocks of every experience of living experience. Like, they are the fabric. They are in the fabric. Almost like this is part of the operating system in a computer language. Hardwired. So maybe it's a matter of uncovering these and becoming aware of them. Feel we're in an age where we are called upon to redefine things. When we come out of this podcast, I would like, to ask a question. How does this become embodied? Like, we are exploring this on so many levels, and it feels like one of the levels is philosophical. So how do we come back from that to embodying, or how does that change? Or I don't even say it's change, transformation. How is it initiated?
What what aspect of it are you talking about embodying? Just curious.
Well, if we're redefining sovereignty, if we're redefining, at the end of the day, this is for the purpose of transformation of our collective experience. Because you're looking at this in transpersonal perspective, right, Edward? Yeah. Your mind is going, okay. So when we explore it that way, I'm like, okay, but where is the beginning? Where is the point of beginning? Well, I'm asking for the feedback from the group as well, opinions here. Since we're talking about it from a philosophical point of view, what's the invitation? Where would the point of beginning or for that transformation? Where does it start? Embodying is like bringing all this to the practical sense. Like if I'm talking of someone who's interested in that, well, where do we start? Of course, we start with this discussion, but then what's the aim, right? What are we being invited to do or to transform?
I love it. I love it. The two things that popped into my mind. One, it'd be for myself, right? The energetic practice of that grieving, that shedding, and then coming back to the goodness and joy. I mean, still finding that, and it doesn't take much going outside and looking at the clouds or feeling the wind or something, if that's what does it, And then the second, in the coaching perspective, it would be individualized. What would it mean to you? Anyone listening, to Edward, to Fatin, Elizabeth. I've never been asked that question in a coaching session. What would sovereignty look like for you? What is one step that could represent or embody sovereignty for yourself? And since I asked, I will answer that. For me, it is taking care of my physical body, which I'm coming back to right now in terms of nutrition and some exercise and that kind of thing. That would feel really like restoring some sort of sense of sovereignty, like a more healthy, I'd lift up my energetic level a bit. So that'd be my answer. And I want to hear Elizabeth.
Well, the question is what brings people to it? What is the catalyst that people would even consider asking that question? And I think for the vast majority of people, it's, I'm in pain. I'm experiencing discomfort. I'm experiencing pain. My needs aren't being met. I'm not being validated. I think it's a general experience of discomfort that causes people to even consider initiating that sense of sovereignty, which most people would not use that term.
That's why I like the term. It's a wrinkle.
Huh? That's why you like the term what?
It's a new wrinkle on, some of those kinds of questions.
Well, the women in some of my spiritual circles have been using this term for a long, long, long time. And there are other people who have been attempting to get away from the government's control over their life for a long time, have been using this term. In other words, like they don't want to have a birth certificate. They didn't want their children to have birth certificates because then they were no longer sovereign beings. Because if they had a birth certificate, then they were owned by the United States government. And there's all this, how that's true conversation that's not for here. So I've heard, this conversation has been going around my circles for, maybe 15 years or so. And it's always in the case of the women, it's this point of no longer being controlled by society's definition. I will not be controlled by your definition of what I should be and what a woman is or is not, and what a woman should and shouldn't do, and what's right for a woman. Because women generally can't ever do anything right. If they make one choice, then then there's this group that says that they're wrong, and et cetera, et cetera. And women do it to each other. And so usually it's just a pain point that brings up like, oh, I need to be sovereign. I need to, and I'm going to do that by doing what is right for me, aligned to my values and to what I want to experience in life. Once we, I think, feel empowered and not come at it from a place of defensiveness, as Cotton has said, it's a response to helplessness and hopelessness, right? But it usually begins as a defensive posturing. And that has to happen. That has to happen. If you've been disempowered for so long, here's this point of neutrality, and you've been disempowered for so long, you have to kind of go to the other end of the spectrum. But eventually, I think once you get to have experiences of empowerment, you can start settling back down to kind of neutral point and taking a bigger, broader, more empathetic look at everyone else around you. I think the initiation depends on the level of disempowerment somebody is experiencing. And I think the scope, the breadth of how they're looking at their sovereignty broadens as a person begins to feel more empowered.
I'm going to step in next. For me, my experience of lack of sovereignty has caused me to dissociate. I don't feel like I'm in control of this thing. I can't tolerate the experience of not being in control. It just makes me feel disempowered. So I'm going to distract myself with something else. And I'm going to learn to ignore or numb myself whenever I'm around the situation where I'm feeling disempowered. And so I've used a lot of dissociation in order to tolerate domains in which I don't feel sovereign. And usually what the process of reclaiming, because you have to reclaim that experience. In disassociation, you're saying, I'm no longer going to feel that experience anymore. It's too painful. I'm just going to cauterize it, block it off, compartmentalize it, or whatever, and just walk around the experience of it. But in order to restore sovereignty of your own embodiment, you have to begin to feel what you've dissociated yourself from at that point. And that's the angry response at that as well. Right? Why did I dissociate? I'm in pain. Why am I in pain? Because I was abused in that domain, or I had my sovereignty violated in some way. And so in order to reclaim your sovereignty, there's this anger that comes up at the occurrence of the violation. And you have to express and reparent readjust your boundaries, because when you were violated, when you had your sovereignty violated, you didn't have the capacity to defend yourself. And so you have to go through this process of, I'm going to set boundaries so that I can protect this sacred part of me. And then once I have come to the capability of protecting what was sacred, then that anger can begin to dissipate, and the healing can come back in to where you can look at, okay, now I've got some healthy boundary setting around the situation, and I can engage a conversation without getting triggered and angry over what's happening.
So that's beautiful. Thank you for mentioning sometimes the sacred aspect of, anger in terms of alchemizing our experience. And of course, anger is such a big, related to the element of fire, the transformation, and also fire can be destructive. So this exploration is so beautiful. We could do that in a different podcast altogether because anger is really one of those big domains, and fire is related to it. And as I listen to all of you, I feel like, oh my God, I'm hearing a lot about power dynamics and exploring such an invitation to explore power dynamics, but not just power dynamics between people and externally in the environment, but also power dynamics internally. So as you speak, Edward, I'm thinking about, oh my God, the power dynamics with these different parts who have adopted different ways of defending and protecting us internally from those experiences of helplessness or being violated when we were hopeless or young or whatever. So all these power dynamics where the different parts are competing for who's in charge. And just an invitation to know that as long as we are having these power struggles, this power dynamics, this inner, war, I want to say, maybe not as, as articulated in some people, we're still not in that space of alignment or inner harmony. And as long as that state is not available, there is no sovereignty, because the different dynamics, the different protective dynamics, and they are legitimate. I'm not saying they are not good. Okay, they are legitimate, but we are under their mercy and in their grip and under their logic. And as long as that's happening, so I think in this podcast, what I like is that I'm hearing this coming up, and maybe that's the invitation, is to explore what are we being influenced by internally, that even internally we don't really have sovereignty within ourselves. So as long as I'm controlled by a certain attachment or fed by a certain, fear or something, like, I'm not really sovereign, am I? Because I'm under the illusion and the misunderstanding of that, whatever that misunderstanding is. So it's like, I do want that sovereignty within as well, first to start with. So all the work, maybe it's an invitation for the importance of the inner work again and again and again. And just that resonance or that mirroring between what happens in our society, in our countries, and in our environment on the outside, and what is really happening on the inside, and how they're mirroring each other. The micro and the macro. And the sadness. We're so afraid of the sadness. So what's wrong with being sad? When we are going through a transformative portal, it's okay. We're so afraid of being sad, Like, how can we relate to all of these states? We spoke about this earlier, and Thomas, I love how you're speaking about this as well. You're talking about that sadness. So it seems like there is an aspect that is sacred. There is, sacredness to a kind of sadness or the kind of anger or that is needed in the process of becoming sovereign.
Your description, Faten, is so beautiful. And Edward, I want to go back and say how beautifully you conveyed the process, and shared that point of disassociation and what happens when we don't feel sovereign. I think everybody can relate to that. And this idea of progressive sovereignty reminds me of the path of enlightenment. It's a progressive path. And you can, in the moment that you notice something arise within you that you turn your head to, you're no longer looking at the light. You're instantly in the dark. And it's that way with sovereignty, right? It's this process. It's progressive. And I think if we can understand that, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else too, there we can build the courage to have dialogue with people and compassion, understanding that it's a challenging process for everyone.
That's huge. Thank you. Thank you. Everyone has, most everyone I know certainly has areas of their life where they don't feel sovereign, whether they're conscious of it or not. And that can certainly have effects on operating from a place of fear or uncertainty or insecurity. And I think that's one great point for compassion for everybody, really.
Yeah, like my sharing of this last couple weeks and wrestling with these two conflicting parts within myself, right? And recognizing, oh gosh, I'm having that challenge because of this internal conflict. You know, there's always a process of discovering these aspects of my thinking that are not sovereign. And it's, coming to it in degrees, coming to sovereignty and autonomy in degrees, where I am eventually free of one more disempowered aspect of myself that was caused by some disempowering experience, which was created a disempowering belief, and just becoming more and more and more progressively free from all of those things. And even though it's not complete, it feels good to be where, I am.
Thomas, when you were talking about the compassion, I really liked, I like to come back to that, word about that, the compassion. As you, Edward, was talking about that dissociation, and as we spoke earlier about those 80,000 people who are still homeless and no one is looking at them, or at different parts of the world, like in Gaza, and, and how, there is a pandemic of dissociation on a global level. So this, how you describe this about, trauma response, I think there is collective trauma where you get groups of people dissociating by just looking the other way. They're not looking at the situation because they don't want to go through the pain, or maybe they don't want to take responsibility towards this change, the hopelessness. But you said a magic word, Thomas. It's like compassion. Maybe and that's a hard thing. Is compassion cultivated? Can we move from dissociation to compassion? How can we do that? Like, why isn't that accessible to each one of us or to us as societies? Where did it go? I once saw an ad in the TV, and it really touched me, of a child who's still a baby. I just hardly can sit down. So just starting to sit down. And that baby is sitting in front of a TV screen. And there's another baby who's crying on the TV screen. The one who's watching has the pacifier in his mouth or her mouth. And he takes out the pacifier and reaches out, offering it to the baby on the screen. And I was like, this is the compassion that we're talking about, that is born with us in our nature. And this was, by the way, I think it was from the World Organization for Health or something like this. And I thought that was brilliant, because it's almost like we're invited to restore that, or to go back to it, rather than invent it or learn it.
And that has to be modeled.
Yes.
It has to be modeled. Okay. Before the age of 7, in order for that natural instinct of nurturance to remain.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be modeled consistently. And one of the things I really appreciate about your article, Edward, about the embodied transpersonal community, was the understanding. It's such a brilliant article. I can't wait for you to publish it and for people to read it.
Me too.
I know by the time people see this, it will be on your Substack. Everybody needs to go read it. It's absolutely brilliant about what is required for this type of community, and the modeling of that, the model of modeling that you have listed is beautiful. I don't know if you want to say something about that here.
Not yet. I definitely appreciate the feedback. Yeah, it'll be up soon.
Yeah. And it is now becoming imperative that it is modeled because we've lost connection to it. So for little children, maybe it's also not just the modeling, but actually the allowance. Because if it's there and we can just allow it to be rather than model the opposite, So it's so ingrained in my mind, that image. I mean, if that child was not exposed to unlearning that, then it will continue to flourish. So the modeling has become now, like we need to go to school to unlearn first the things that we were taught, and then come back to a place where we allow the restoration of such a quality without judging it in ourselves that it is being, I don't know, weak, naive, whatever it is, Yeah.
I guess I will chime in a little bit.
Okay, good.
In terms of modeling, right? There's the risk associated with the modeling. If I'm not in an environment where I can demonstrate that safely, then it's hard to pass on the modeling of it. So we have to create a value system, an intentional organization of people where it's safe to model, it's safe to talk about, and then we in the intentional enabling of it, we entrain to it being renormalized again. It's just so risky right now to try to be just instantly open and vulnerable. We're afraid to get taken advantage of or trampled. We go through this world with our defenses up on high, and that's the barrier to really demonstrate is that we have to create agreements to create spaces where we value each other again.
And I want to
That's
say
right.
that,
And I'll just say this very quickly. And the risk aversion that you are talking about, that there's this risk aversion, what we're seeing in society is that risk aversion is decreasing, right? So the situations are getting so insanely outrageous that the risk aversion is now reduced. People are willing to make that risk. So when something is important enough, people will take that risk.
and maybe it's also like to start exercising that and modeling it, even for ourselves, by first starting closer to home. So modeling it in our relationship to our bodies, for example, or to our, to the earth, to my garden, to my water resource or stuff like this, because then it becomes an accessible. This is not as risky as when I'm dealing with someone else, right? But in my environment, that's easily accessible for me in my own body, hopefully, if I haven't been traumatized in my relationship to my body. But it becomes, because like that's the easy, when you spoke about those circles, Elizabeth, so who's more intimate than my own self here? So if I can model this internally and in my own body, and then in my room, and then in my garden and stuff like this, then it becomes more, this is information. That's what I'm trying to say. The experience becomes available in the morphic field of experience, and it builds up so that it fills up to a certain inertia. And then when that inertia is available, then it starts to move like 100 monkeys, right?
I will say this, it's a lot harder to model by yourself because you don't already have an experience of it yet. And it's a lot easier when you have that model demonstrated through the embodiment of another person. Our mirror neurons are tuning into how do I translate that experience into me demonstrating that behavior as well? So, it's easier to model because you're by yourself, but it's also harder to model because you don't know what it is to be embodied yet with that modeling.
Well, I want to bring in an example here of what happens in the plant medicine world. So when someone does like a mushroom journey or ayahuasca or something like this, they can get a full experience of that, possibly, if that's their intention, and they are blessed enough to have that experience where they can actually have that experience registered inside of them. And then that mirroring becomes less important if they integrate it within themselves. I'm just using that data, that it is not impossible, but in certain practices, meditation, dream work, all the healing work that's being done in so many different alternative modalities, that's where we go when the purpose is to go inside and have that experience embodied in our psyche. And that way, there is less dependency on the environment, the outside environment, to give that experience. So I guess we all work in this field, and maybe we can speak of it that way. But it's also an invitation because like now more than ever, the individual work is the starting point, like the where we start from. We can't change this equation. It's way too big if we're going to look at it all from the outside. What do you think, Elizabeth? I see you looking at that.
Well, doing the inner work is where everything begins, right? Mm-hmm. That initial question, oh, I'm suffering. I'm in pain. I need healing. I'm alone. That brilliant point where, Edward is saying you're disassociating. We all disassociate from things, right? But to be aware that you're disassociating, to be aware that you're in pain, to be aware that you're seeking something different, and being willing to take that risk to do the inner work. It's a beautiful thing to me when we get to that point. And you're right. I was thinking the same thing. We're all in this field doing this work in one way or another, right? And we're all doing our inner work. Everyone here has been doing their work, making a commitment to uncovering what makes them better, more expressions of wholeness, and what those obstacles are. I was just appreciating the beauty of everyone here and appreciating what you bring to the table from your own experiences and your own inner work and embodiment. That's where my head was. I was just really in appreciation of everyone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I share this with you. Yeah, it's really present for me. I feel it. Yeah. So it's a kind of space that is being woven here. And I love that. Inviting people again to step into that space. Yes. Beautiful. I can't wait for your article to come out, Edward. I can hardly wait. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Thank you. So I'm feeling the energy shift in me towards wrapping up. Feels like it's being a shared experience. Anybody want to say some last few words?
I wanted to share a paraphrase of a Buddhist daily calendar that was today, actually. Basically, it was taking care of someone even in your thought plants the seeds of, good fortune or something like that. Basically, like we talk about compassion, and there's, it's easy to think of people that are being difficult or that I have challenges with or things like that. But it's like even just taking 2 seconds, let's say 5 seconds to think well of them or to give them that compassion is huge. I mean, like, where else does it start, That
is definitely beautiful and powerful. That is the work, really, is because when you're out there in the environment, you're no longer have a capacity or the space internally to evolve your understanding. You're in the midst of responding, and it's whatever existing understanding is you have. But in taking that time to be alone, doing that work on your own, you're evolving where you're going to respond from inside yourself.
That's a beautiful articulation of sovereignty. I love it. From both of you, thank you so much.
Right. Love you guys.
Love you all too.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. And if listeners are still here after this long conversation, thank you for listening.
Yes.
And I would love to hear your comments and to see your comments about any part of this conversation. We invite you to join us in these conversations in the comments.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Be one with us in the comments.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, have a great
Bye,
day,
everybody.
See you next
everyone.
time.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to go to sleep.
You too. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care of
Bye-bye.
yourselves. Bye-bye. Bye.